Here we go. And welcome to Hangout and Talk Twins, also known as Twins Hangout, also known as... Seth has given me a funny look already.
You can't use that lead-in. We're going to get sued by another local podcast for that welcome.
And welcome.
Did I steal that one?
Yeah, what was that?
God, we should start this one over, but we can't. All right.
That's been your most creative start so far.
Well, I was still thinking about Eric and his biking in his swim trunks. Anyway, we're joined tonight with by Talk to Contact famous let me try that again. It's been a rough one. Of Talk to Contact fame's Eric Price, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk Twins. I'm excited to be on what I think might be the best Twins podcast that's out there right now.
As Eric is drinking his beer, I don't know. Anyway, Eric, let's just get straight down to the meats and potatoes of this. Tell us about recent developments in your life.
Is that it?
Any recent developments?
Yeah. I mean, like, of the last month.
Well, in the last month, let's see. I've been to some Twins games. I got engaged. I got this pretty awesome beard going on. I mean, that's pretty good. That's 3 great achievements for the last month.
And now, tell us about that middle one.
I forgot what the middle one was. Refresh my memory.
Engagement,
was it the beard?
right?
Oh, yeah. So I'm engaged to Laura. She's in the kitchen. She's being cool. She's making me a snack. She's not making me a snack. She's very surprised by that. So, no, things are good. I'm entering into the marriage land in less than a year now. So I'll be hopefully having some sex trophies like Jeremy within the next couple of years.
He could have the outfielder.
Yeah, we could have a whole team.
So how's she doing? Is she, like, thinking about Seth and I, or what?
Yeah, so if you missed it on Twitter earlier, Laura was telling me, she said the other night she had a dream where she left me and she got married to both Jeremy and Seth. So,
you know what my first thought on that was? I've been wondering the whole time, but clearly she does have good taste, so that's a good thing for you there.
Clearly, not only does she have good taste, but she's been paying attention to the weird things I listen to on iTunes over the last year or so.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Into some Twins knowledge.
Do you talk about us a lot? I mean, is that what's going on?
Not only do I talk about you, but I have pictures of you all over our apartment. That picture from Jeremy and I hugging at the Twins Daily winter meltdown over at Mason's, that's just, there's probably 3, 4, 5 pictures of that framed hanging around our apartment.
Yeah, that pops up just randomly on my Facebook page almost weekly.
Yeah, that's probably Laura's doing. She's dreaming about you. And then Seth, I've been listening to Seth's podcast for 3 years, talking minor leagues and everything like that. Every time she hears Seth's voice, she just gets a twinkle in her eye.
I can understand that. It never happens when I'm giving presentations at work, though.
Yeah, when I told her I was coming on the podcast tonight with both of you, she just absolutely lost her mind. She thinks I'm the most famous person in Minnesota right now.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you do have a sweet beard.
It is a good one.
So that counts for some. And as long as we're on the topic of facial hair, tell us about your brother's mustache.
So my brother Paul, at Baseball Pirate on Twitter, he's a member of America's Armed Forces. He's in the smallest of the forces, the United States Coast Guard. And as a Coast Guardsman, he is entitled to grow a minimal amount of facial hair, but he takes advantage by growing the creepiest mustaches he could possibly grow. Probably every 5 or 6 months he takes a stab at it. And apparently his girlfriend, de jour, has allowed him to grow a terrible mustache. And not only that, he also is now an owner of a cat. So he has a cat, he has a mustache. He's basically a panel van away from being a pedophile.
I have a cat.
But you don't have a creepy mustache.
I'm working on it.
I'm feeling like my role here tonight is just to sit back and listen and laugh. I feel like kind of bonus on, his radio stuff. Your job is just to laugh.
Yeah, just be a guy that chuckles.
Yeah,
all the time.
I mean,
Right.
Here's my thing. The whole, we were talking about, so Thursday night we're going to do this draft thing, and we're talking about bonus, and then we're going to do a K-Fan thing with bonus. So I guess the whole, Gleeman and the Geek intro was just, what do you call that when something comes out when you're not thinking about it, but you obviously were thinking about it?
It's like a subliminal message or something?
Apparently they're doing it to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
We
Well,
should tell
there
people
was that-
about that, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to go back to Eric, but the question on Twitter was when Andrew was like, who owns me? And John's like, I own you. John must be, doing something to our heads.
Well, the Twins Geek...
Seth, it's your head too. Eric, I think, you know what, Eric, you're not free either because tell us about writing the minor league report.
Well, so I'm lucky enough, I guess I would say that, to have been asked, I think courtesy of Cody and yourself, to write a minor league report once a week. So it's pretty cool just taking a look at the box scores. I think my biggest thrill out of writing the minor league report every Thursday night, and I think, unfortunately, Seth knows that I actually write the minor league report at 5 o'clock on Friday mornings, and he's the one that has to publish it. But I get a chance to look through some box scores and read some post-game reports and learn about some guys that maybe you never hear about unless you're actually looking through all those box scores and trying to figure out who are some minor league guys, especially at the low A and high A levels, that maybe have snuck by your radar early on in their Twins careers.
Yeah, that's the thing I enjoy about doing it, and it's why I hate relinquishing any of those days, even though I think I'm only writing about 2 a week now, is just that. It's finding out what's happening on a day-to-day basis because, everyone knows who Buxton and Sano and Meyer and some of those guys are, but it's a lot of fun learning about those other guys. And when those other guys, the less-known guys, get just a cup of coffee, you kind of feel pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's really
Eric,
neat.
can I ask you a question?
You see a name you've never heard of, and you're like, oh, this is a guy. And then you look him up on Baseball Reference, you look him up on Fangraphs, whatever it is, to kind of find out, oh, this is a guy who's actually been toiling around in the Twin system for 3 years, just never realized who he was because he got drafted in the 27th round.
But then it bothers me because if that's what you know, then that means you don't follow my tweets close enough.
Well, come on, Jeremy. I have a day job. I can't just follow the tweets of a Wisconsin teacher all the time. Plus, you're in Wisconsin, so we can only believe half of everything you ever say.
You were in Wisconsin for the last 8 years.
Well, I was in Wisconsin for a couple of years, but I tried to hide it as much as I could. I'd rather be from Iowa.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, no, that's not true. I used to say when I lived in Platteville, Wisconsin is so bad, the coolest thing in a 30-mile radius is Iowa.
So Platteville's southwest corner, right?
Yeah, essentially, if you jump over the river, you're in Iowa, and that's it. That's the only thing around.
Yeah, I've never been there.
I wouldn't recommend it.
I want to ask you a question. Your name's Eric, but you go by E. Rolf. Can you explain that to us?
That's an easy one. About the time I started getting hooked up on Twitter, was about this time I was finishing up with graduate school. And so I changed all my handles, Facebook, Twitter, internet, everything. I changed it from Eric to E. Rolf, so that if I was looking for jobs in the academic fields, if anyone searched the name Eric Pleiss, they'd find nothing. But only the people that actually knew me could know E. Rolf is an actual person. I didn't want to compromise anything by talking shit about Wisconsin or anything that comes from the cow turd state or anything like that.
So what happens? Do you know what happens when you Google Eric Pleiss?
Oh man, I think there's a German basketball player named Eric Pleiss who is like a total Aryan race-looking guy. But beyond that, I can't imagine what you could find.
Well, the first thing that comes up is Eric Pleiss at Knuckleballs.
Well, that's good. That's a good place to find me. Find me at knuckleballsblog.com, writing about the Twins, sharing the Talk to Contact podcast, so that's good.
And the second thing that comes up is Rolf Pleiss on Twitter.
My disguise is not working out well.
So if you've applied for some jobs and haven't got some callbacks,
I need to come up with a new handle immediately.
All right, I'm going to turn this just slightly a little bit, unless Jeremy's got some more. But Eric, I want to ask you about the podcast. Obviously, Talk to Contact is, as much as you were kind to us earlier, a huge success in the Twins blogosphere or podosphere or whatever you call it. What gave you the motivation to start that, and kind of tell us how it's grown? Obviously, you've got a few different guys joining you every week and guests more frequently, but just how did it start?
You know, Seth, it kind of started out of, well, Paul and I are twin brothers, and we both started blogging about the Twins over at Puckett's Pond initially because we were exchanging 500-word emails just about every day about this is what we think about the Twins, this is what's going on, this is our opinion. And we figured, well, we enjoy these conversations. Maybe we could put them in a blog form. And so we both started writing at Puckett's Pond. And then we realized, well, blogging is not our best medium. Neither of us are really committed to it. We don't do it on a regular basis like you've done, like John has done, like Parker and Nick have done. We can't do that, 4 or 5 times a week. So we just started recording the phone conversations that we had on a podcast. Originally started the two of us talking Twins, having a good time. And then Paul, being in the military, at some point he had to go out to sea with the Coast Guard and be on a boat for about 6 months at a time. So we had talked with Cody before previously on a podcast, so we brought him on board. So he started contributing regularly to the podcast. When Paul came back from being on deployment, we said, hey, Cody, how'd you like to stay on board with us and be a permanent member of this? And he said, heck yes. There's only 3 people in North Dakota that listen to me, so we need some extra people listening in Minnesota. So we got Cody on board. And then Paul's college buddy, Paul actually spent a couple of years going to college at St. Cloud State. And his buddy, Jay Korn, who also is a former military guy, got hooked up with us. And we really liked what Jay had to bring to the podcast because Jay kind of brings in every man's point of view to the podcast. He thinks that everyone who tries hard and gives a lot of effort is going to hit 200 home runs and have 5,000 RBIs every year. So we really liked that kind of common man aspect that Jay brought to the podcast. And with Cody and I, we kind of have a more analytical lean. Paul has just kind of a basically what can you be excited about lean, and Jay has that everyman lean. So we think we, at this point, have a pretty good mix, and fans have responded to what we talk about. We have a fairly sizable audience that listens to us every week, and really what we want to do is just, it's 4 guys having a good time talking about the Twins, and Paul and I obviously have a good rapport. We're twin brothers. We've been having a good time together for the last 29 and a half years. But we're happy that anyone listens to our podcast at all. We'd be doing this show if no one listened to us. But, we love what you guys are doing on the Twins Hangouts podcast. We try and do a little bit of a minor league segment every week. We do a Down on the Pond segment. We profile one minor league player. We talk about one specific aspect of the minor leagues, but we could never do the 90 minutes that you guys do on the minor leagues plus the 30 minutes that you do on regular Twins talks or roster construction or anything like that. So it's nice that you guys have the Tuesday podcast so we can listen to you and steal half your ideas and crunch them down into a 10-minute segment and talk about them on our show the next night.
And that's really what we do it for, because, you know, you mentioned that you would do your show even if no one was listening. Well, Jeremy and I are proof of that, because I don't think anyone listens to us. So,
It's just Eric and Paul, essentially.
Yeah, I think so. And you guys are the only guys that get through all 2 hours, I think.
Well, I tell you, 2 hours is a monumental podcast, but I feel accomplished every time I get to the last 2 hours. I usually start listening on Wednesday morning, and if I can get through the first 90 minutes before we start podcasting on Wednesday night, I feel like I really accomplished something. And then I always listen to the rest of the podcast on Thursday morning on my drive to work, and I always think, these are 3 more things I should have talked about last night on our podcast. And so you guys are delivering great original content. I'm really excited about what you deliver every week, especially Jeremy, with your take on the draft coming up. Seth, your minor league experience and all the guys you know, the connections you have. You guys do a really spectacular show.
One of the things that I think you incorporated probably a couple of months ago was, instead of just getting, you know, schmucks like myself or Jeremy or, you know, other, you know, bloggers and stuff on the show, you've been able to get guys like Trevor May, Casey Fien, you know, Jim Callis, I think last week. I mean, those are some big names. They're going to bring in some people. Gabe Kapler. I mean, there's some names. What was the plan going in there, and have you been as successful in doing that as you'd hoped?
So we definitely try and have a big-time guest. Well, I mean, Seth, I think you were one of the first guests that we ever had on our show when we were doing this, and we originally started just reaching out to other Twins bloggers, but our kind of model is to every other week have some type of big-name guest on our show. And really, we've been able to do that because of Twitter. So we'll reach out to, whether it was last week, we just reach out to Jim Callis on Twitter and say, hey, we love what you're doing. Would you like to come on the show, talk about the Twins? We've, like you said, Jim Callis. We've had Jason Parks from Baseball Perspectives, Gabe Kapler from Fox Sports 1. You know, we've had a variety of guests. We had Trevor May on the show. We had Casey Fien on earlier this year. And really all of that we do through our Twitter networking. So Twitter is a big part of our show. It's what we really like to do is, you know, engage people who are engaged in social media and find a way to connect them to our show and find ways to really, I think Paul always says this best. He pretends to do a podcast so that he can talk to people that are more famous than he is about baseball. So we've had Casey Fien on the show. I think Paul's favorite guest that he ever had on the show, we had Carson Sestouli on the show, and Paul had a boner for about 3 weeks after that. We had an opportunity to interview Corey Provis, the Twins radio main guy there, so that was a really cool thing. But, you know, we just had really good luck reaching out to people informally through Twitter. And so if anyone out there is thinking about starting a podcast, I mean, you guys have a lot of great experience getting minor league guests on the show, and I mean, Twitter is a powerful medium when you're looking to do something informal like a podcast is just a fan podcast. All you have to do is send out a bunch of tweets saying, hey, will you help us out? And more often than not, people are going to say, yes, we'd love to be on your show. Let's talk about baseball. Let's talk about the Twins. If it's a minor league player, let's talk about my experience growing through the minor leagues, growing through the Twins system, that kind of thing. So we've been really fortunate that people continue to say yes when we reach out and say, hey, will you help us out?
I think now is the perfect time for us to use that Twitter. And one of the things that Eric is known for is when the Twins do Ask a Twin, Eric comes up with some of the worst questions in the history of the world.
Best questions.
And they never get asked. So what I was going to do is I was going to do the Ask E. Rolf questions like he asked, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to try to figure out a way quick to find the Ask a Twin questions that Eric has asked that don't really matter, and I'm going to ask him some of his own questions.
I'm ready.
Uh-huh.
I think if you just look on Twitter, just hashtag Ask a Twin, I bet 70% of the questions that are out there are straight from my mouth.
Okay, here's the first one. Eric, this is from Eric. Do you wear an extra jockstrap when Samuel Deduno is pitching?
Absolutely. How could you not? This guy bounces more pitches in the dirt and throws more crazy things. He's even said in the past, he has no idea where the balls are going after they leave his hand. So if Sam Deduno is pitching and I'm the catcher, maybe I'm not just wearing 2 jock straps. I'm wearing 2 jock straps plus like one of those hot hand protectors you use when you're reaching a hot pot of the oven. I'm just stuffing one of those in the jock as well. I want all the protection I can get down in the man region.
Do you also do that on laundry day?
Oh, yeah. On laundry day, it's just not the old hot hands. It's like, I got a metal cooling rack down there, anything I can get. Marshmallows are real good. They're very absorbent.
Another one for you. This is asked from Eric. This is a question for Eric. On the Talk to Contact podcast, do you consider yourself the point guard of the team or the power forward?
I actually, if I ask that question, it's terrible because I don't actually know the difference between a point guard and a power forward. I don't even know what a power forward is. I know the point guard is the guy that dribbles the basketball over the center court line, and so I think that's the Ricky Rubio of the podcast. And as the most handsome member of the Talk to Contact podcast, I would like to think of myself as the Ricky Rubio. But I also know Ricky Rubio sucks at shooting and scoring. And I can tell you this, Rolf Pleiss always scores.
Oh, it was like it was scripted, but it wasn't. All right, I'm going to find an actual one that someone asked you now. I had it. Give me a second.
This is some high-quality podcasting right about here.
Listen, anytime you can fill dead air with a guy going, give me a second, let me just look this up real quick, you are on the top level of baseball podcasts. You hear that on the Cleveland and the Geek. You hear it on Talk to Contact. You even hear that on, like, national podcasts on Effectively Wild. You hear that on a really great baseball podcast, the Up and In podcast in the back of the day. You hear it on the Back of the Bullpen podcast, which is with Jason Wojciechowski. That's another great baseball podcast. Every podcast out there is the hold on, let me Google this a minute segment.
Okay, I'm ready for you. You ready for me? Are you ready for this question?
Hit it.
This question comes from Rachel. Do you spend the entire offseason thinking of Ask a Twin questions?
I don't. I wish I could say yes. But every dumb Ask a Twin question that I come up with is just top of the head, just sucking it right out of the old noggin. Just, it's on the spot, it's immediate. I basically think of things that I would like to ask to the next person that comes into my office at work, and I just shoot it out there.
Do you, like, just look around and see something like, oh, there's a window frame, and then, like, ask a question about a window frame?
Yeah, so I'll see a window frame, and I'll think, oh, window frame. Window frame, Jesus was a carpenter. If you were Jesus, what would be your favorite carpentry project? That's how it happens. Then I just put hashtag Ask a Twin right on the end of that.
I think you got it.
It happens in real time.
So you got any big plans coming up?
Well, I gotta be honest with you. About 3/4 of the way through last season, the @Twins account sent me a direct message and said, "Hey, you got to lay off it with the Ask a Twin series because you're getting way too many responses out there. So, as I did with Ask a Twin every week, this is a dialed-down E-Rolf Pleiss version of Ask a Twin every week. So I try and now, instead of 1 out of every 15, 1 out of every 3 now is actual Ask a Twin questions, things that might get answered on air. But other than that, we're just continuing on with the Talk to Contact podcast. We're hoping in the next week or so we're going to talk to Cole Stewart and Ryan Eads about their draft experience. And then, hey, everybody, look out. Seth Stowes and Jeremy Nygaard are coming on the Talk to Contact podcast the week after the draft to talk about who the Twins drafted, where those players might fit into the minor league system. So we're looking to the biggest experts we know on the Twins draft and Twins minor league to help give some content to our listeners. And, we're just going to keep on keeping on. We talk about drinking beer every week, and we do plenty of that. We talk about the minor league system, and then we kind of try and talk about things that we think are interesting in the Twins system every week. And I'm surprised week after week after week, despite, you guys talk about the Twins on your show, Gleeman the Geek talk about Twins on their show. I know there's interesting things that happen on the Sportive podcast. I know Parker, what's the name of Parker's podcast? It's like the No Juice podcast. So there's all kinds of podcasts that are kind of some type of Twins content, but we come up with something interesting every week, mostly because Cody has something crazy to say out of Fargo, North Dakota, and Jay Cord has something absolutely baffling to discuss, like thinking that Josmio Pinto can hit 25 home runs. So we always have something unique and interesting to talk about on our podcast. But I would be willing to guess that about 30% of our content is just poached straight from the Twins Hangout podcast every Tuesday night.
I got one more question. This just came in. It's actually kind of funny. It's from Becky Glander. I don't know who that is, but she wants to know. Okay, well, she wants to know who the baseball pirate thinks is the hottest Twin. And since we're not talking to him, you're going to have to take this one.
That's a no-brainer. The baseball pirate thinks the hottest Twin is Dan Gladden, circa 1992, with a long, flowing mullet. And I don't care if Dan Gladden's not currently on the Twins. Dan Gladden's mullet and his beautiful flowing locks are always going to be the baseball pirate's favorite Twins player. If you're looking at current Twins, the baseball pirate certainly has a crush on Brian Dozier pre-haircut. But if you look at post-haircut, I would have to think that the baseball pirate's favorite Minnesota Twin is Eduardo Escobar, because that's just a sexy, sexy man.
I got nothing.
Either Seth is frozen, or he's just shocked.
Yeah, I got nothing. I was going to bring up the silky smooth comparison of how you compare those, but you brought that up. Good.
There's nothing more than I like than seeing Silky Smooth do something wonderful with the baseball, whether it's defensively, whether it's at the bat with, whether it's sneaking a double through in a home run. Silky Smooth, and here's the thing out there for all the listeners to your podcast. If anyone has an audio recording of Silky Smooth Brian Dozier playing in his college band, Silky Smooth, send that to Seth and Jeremy, because that will be the basis of the new Twins Hangouts theme song. I guarantee it. Give us Silky Smooth audio recordings. We want to hear it.
Well, again, you have to remember that you'll want to mention that on your show tomorrow night, because obviously nobody listens to ours. So if you could mention that tomorrow night on your show.
Send any audio files your way.
I want to. Did you just say you guys are interviewing Cole Stewart and Ryan Eads?
Well, here's the deal. We're hoping to interview them. We've been in touch with the Cedar Rapids communications director, and We've made some forward progress with that, but we're either going to have one of them on this week or next week to talk about their draft experience. So, has not yet been confirmed, but is likely upcoming to see one of the top 2 Twins draft picks from a year ago talk about their draft experience on the podcast.
Eric, did you ever try to talk to anybody from the Beloit communication department before they went to Cedar Rapids?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Our podcast was only going on very briefly in Beloit, but actually, when the Twins were still in Beloit, I actually lived in Janesville, Wisconsin, only about 10 minutes away from Beloit. And I went down there quite a few times, but that was way before I ever had a dream of a podcast. And well before I could think of at least 45 or 50 people listening to me on an annual basis, weekly basis.
Well, you were really missed out on that one.
Yeah, I totally screwed the pooch, so to speak.
I only say that because I'll tell you off air.
Yeah. That would be good.
Top secret news coming at you. I'll tweet that out
honestly,
later.
I just like to watch Seth start to squirm in his seat.
Doesn't happen.
When he starts to like this, I know that he's bothered by what I'm saying.
I'm excited every week that you guys continue to do your Hangout in a video podcast format. Last week on the Talk to Contact podcast, we just do an audio podcast, but we recorded it with a video segment. So we could all see each other as we were talking. That is way more awkward than just talking to a guy with a straight audio file. So I don't know how you guys continue to do this, and you continue to get people to come on your show, a live show, so people can just tune into iTunes and listen to you and watch you and see the stupid things you're doing every single week live in person.
Yeah, I mean, we bring down the wall and we just kind of let anybody in. It's kind of how we roll.
Yeah, this is the third wall of podcasting, or the fourth wall, or however many walls it is when you only do audio on the recording.
I think it's just the one wall.
Just one wall, okay.
First you can hear us, now you can...
All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. That's what I say.
Hey, Eric, what are your thoughts on who the new Twins center fielder is right now?
Listen, Danny Santana is not a center fielder, and apparently Aaron Hicks is not a center fielder either. So I don't know what the Twins are going to do. They're just probably praying that Sam Fuld comes back to from this concussion in the next week or so, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Aaron Hicks sent down to AAA to learn to hit breaking balls off of right-handers now that he's no longer switch hitting.
I agree. We were just talking that pre-show and wondering if right now Danny Santana is your starting center fielder, and I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, he's a starting center fielder until Sam Fuld is back. Once Sam Fuld comes back, I think he's going to start 5 out of 6 games a week. Danny Santana will continue to get in the game when he can, but I think it's right now for Aaron Hicks, desperate times for that guy. He's going to be making his next substantial appearances down in AAA.
Let me ask you this question, just to throw some quick hitters and let you talk Twins here a little bit before we let you go, unless you have to go. But who is the one guy on the Twins roster that if he's coming up the next half inning, you're not going to the bathroom, you're not going out to do some yard work, you're going to hold off on your bike ride and your swim trunks until they're done hitting? Who is that player for you right now?
I think it's Oswaldo Arcia. I mean, Oswaldo Arcia is the Twins hitter with the most upside right now. Certainly he's going to continue to strike out a ton. But when Oswaldo Arcia makes contact, exciting things happen. And there's no other player on the Twins roster right now that it can excite you so much offensively. Certainly Josh Willingham has been on fire since he's come back from the DL, but Josh Willingham is Josh Willingham. Oswaldo Arcia is still a little bit of an unknown. He still does special things. He's still really, really young for a baseball player. And if he can get into the game more frequently, if he can be a regular contributor to this Twins team, then Oswaldo Arcia is the guy that I'm watching every day. And let me just say this. Let me add this in. If Ron Gardenhire ever starts playing Josmil Pinto on a regular basis, if he ever gets over this crazy obsession he has with having a third catcher or losing his designated hitter, if Josmil Pinto could be in the lineup every single day, I think Josmil Pinto becomes the most exciting hitter in the Twins lineup.
I can't disagree. Hey, here's another one. Who is your favorite Twins prospect? And it doesn't have to be one of the big names. And who, after you've done all of these weeks for about a year and a half or whatever it's been, you're down on the pond, player of the week or whatever, who's kind of the unsung minor league guy that you've learned a little about that you're really kind of interested or follow a lot?
Well, so that's two different things. Who's my favorite minor league player, and then who's been our favorite, or my best segment, or my most appreciated segment from the Down on the Pond? I think my favorite minor league player at this time is still Devinson Romero. I like to think of him down at AAA. He's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, especially this year. Trevor Plouffe has continued to play a lot better, especially defensively. He's having a pretty good year offensively right now. Devinson Romero was a guy that was all of a sudden going to contend with Trevor Plouffe 2 years ago. He had some visa issues and missed the entirety of spring training. So he's a guy that I think kind of got squeezed in the minor league system, maybe due to no fault of his own. So he's a guy that I really root for in the minor league system. And then when I think about our favorite, my favorite Down in the Pond segment that we've had, that's hands down, it's got to go to Trevor May. And I think when we talked to Trevor May earlier this year, we talked to him, I think, in early January. The interview that we did with Trevor May was so interesting because Trevor May was just a candid guy. He talked all about this is his mindset when he's on the mound. This is the way that he attacks hitters. This is what he thinks about when he's going through his motions. And Trevor May, as much as he is a guy that has a lot of velocity and can really run it up there, this is a guy that's as a cerebral of pitcher. He's thinking about all those pitches. He's really into the game, not just the physical game, but the mental game. And so he's been the most exciting player that we've had an opportunity to interview and really talk about on that Down in the Pond segment.
I'll say this. When you had that Trevor May interview, it was fascinating. And I think if I would have done it at the time, he would have jumped up 3 or 4 spots in a top 20 Twins prospect ranking because of it. And based on what he was telling you, some of the changes that he made, not only physically but mentally through his own fall league experience, we shouldn't be surprised with how well he's pitched this year. And to me, that goes to a bigger picture with this whole podcasting thing. So if anyone's listening to this accidentally and you accidentally keep listening to this, and you're thinking about doing a podcast, consider trying to reach out to minor leaguers and get to know them, because that's how you get to understand the inner workings. I was talking to Liam Hendricks when he was in low A ball, or talking to Brian Dozier when he was in Fort Myers. I did an interview with Matt Garza when he was playing for Fort Myers. Kyle Gibson, the night that he had to sign, he was on a podcast I did at that time, 80 minutes before he had to sign, and he hadn't signed yet. But you get to know these guys on even just that little bit of a level, and you get to understand what they're thinking. And it's more than just stats and a box score. They're people, and they're going through things. They go through slumps, and how are they going to make it through it? And getting to know a guy like Brian Dozier or Kyle Gibson, that at some point they're going to be just fine.
Well, and I think, Seth, you always say it when you write the handbook every year, and I know Jeremy now is a bigger part of writing that handbook, and Seth is, and Cody as well from our podcast, but that's all about singing the praises of unheralded minor league players. What are they doing with their lives? What is it that goes into all of the work they put in on the minor league system, especially when you're talking about guys who aren't drafted in the first 3 or 4 rounds. We talked to Gabe Kapler a couple of weeks ago on our podcast. He's a 57th round draft pick. Okay, right. And he ended up having more than a decade worth of experience at the major league. So what is it like for those guys toiling away at the minor league levels, putting in all the same effort that the major league players do? And I think as Twins fans and as podcasters, we have an opportunity to really spotlight the work that these guys are putting in and kind of share their stories with Twins fans at large. And I think this is the stories, and Seth, you probably know this better than anyone, these are the stories that a lot of people don't hear. And so it's a really great opportunity to share those stories with other Twins fans and kind of say, hey, this guy might be the next great Twins fan. Or what we commonly do on our Down on the Pond segment is, hey, this is just a guy that's overlooked every week, but he's battling week after week at the AA or the high A or whatever level it is in the minor league system. This is a guy that's putting in just as much of work as the top billed prospects without as much fanfare. And we should definitely check out these guys, what they're doing, and appreciate the work that they're putting in.
A good illustration of that on Twitter the other day. Someone was upset at me for using the free Johan hashtag. Johan Pino having another strong outing. I think his ERA this year is like 1.5. I mean, I was a huge Johan Pino guy 8 years ago when he was originally with the Twins organization, and I was almost upset when he was traded for Carl Pavano.
Almost.
Okay, I was a little bit, but
yeah, but now Johan Pino's like 32 or 33 years old, and he's lighting it up at AAA.
He's like
this
30.
My whole
thing is, there's a lot of prospects that get a lot of fanfare that don't get to AAA, or they may just be handed things. Well, this is a guy who's put in his dues for a long time, and he's been successful for a long time. I'd love to see him get a cup of coffee, and that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying he's a future cornerstone of the organization, but my comment always will be that these guys deserve the credit, and that's I think part of what we do here and in the Prospect Handbook, and you're doing as well. So we've already taken up more time of yours and I know you like going to bed at like 6:30. So I don't know how much time you got here.
Last night I was in bed at 8:25. The sun was still shining in my bedroom window when I went to sleep. But I tell you what, I'm happy to stay up late to talk Twins with you guys. I'm excited about what you guys are doing on your podcast. Like I said, I think you guys have the most informative Twins podcast that's out there. You're more informative than Gleeman the Geek. You're more informative than the podcast that I do with Cody and Paul and Jay. The depth of knowledge you guys have for the minor league system, the things that Jeremy knows about salary structure and what the Twins are going to do on draft day. I mean, you guys are tuned in to exactly what the Twins are doing, and the rest of us are just hoping to skimp by gleaning a little bit of knowledge about what you guys do on a week-to-week basis.
I have 2 questions for Eric before we let you go.
Okay, I'm
ready. One comes from your brother. He wants to know if you'll ever have children, and if you do, you can't go to bed at 8:25, what you will name them.
Well, that's easy. We're going to have 2 sons. The first son is going to be named Henry Ernest, and we're going to call him Hank. And the second son is going to be known as August Stephen, and we're going to call him Gus. So there's the name. We're going to have kids. If we have girls, we'll just kind of wing it, and we'll teach them to respect themselves and know karate.
Little Hank, he's so cute in those pigtails.
And secondly, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the sexiest, how do you rank Trevor May's voice and Lewis Thorpe's accent?
Wow.
Wow. I heard Lewis Thorpe. Was he on your guys' podcast? Was that a couple of weeks ago that he was on there with his sexy Australian accent?
Yes.
And man, there's nothing sexier than that. I don't think you can compete with a sexy Australian accent. I work with a lady who is from England, and I just get a kick out of talking with her once a week. But with Lewis Thorpe, holy cow, he was on your guys' segment with the unheralded left-handers segment. I think it was something like that. But holy cow, I was just I had to change my underpants after that.
So a 10.
I'm famous for my arbitrary ranking scales on the Talk to Contact podcast, and I would give that a 19 out of a 23 as far as the wetness scale goes.
Oh my god.
And Trevor May's deep voice, do we want to go there?
Listen, Trevor May, maybe his voice isn't that great, but when you listen to his lyrics as DJ Mazer, and he's dropping fat beats, it's not Louis Thorpe level, but that's probably a 16 out of 37 when you really get down to it. So he's pretty sexy. And listen to this. I'm pretty proud of having dropped an F-bomb on the Twins Hangouts tonight. Jeremy and Seth said, no matter what you do, we're not getting an explicit tag on this podcast. So pretty proud of myself right now. I give myself a 35 out of 40 right now on not dropping an F-bomb.
Well, I'm not dropping an F-bomb. I give you a 40 out of 40 because you didn't.
Well, you can go after yourself.
So, Seth, do you have any parting words for Eric before he tucks himself into bed tonight?
No. I've got nothing, man. I think you've covered everything. You've made us sound good, way better than we actually are. Obviously, we encourage everyone to check out the Talk to Contact podcast because it is really awesome, and you guys do a great job every week, and we don't know how you guys do it. So glad you came on, gave us a good chuckle, but you kind of underplay it. You guys know baseball, too, and makes it a lot of fun to kind of be able to listen to more Twins talk throughout the week. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Seth. Let me just say that if there's any young patriotic Americans out there and you're thinking about joining the American Armed Forces, think about the Coast Guard first and foremost. The Coast Guard needs great people to protect our borders, and the baseball pirate would be upset if I didn't mention it. Go United States, go Hoyas, go Coast Guard.
And Eric, I'm just going to send you off with a hashtag bro hug since we can't actually do that.
Bro hug. I'm all about it. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
That was fun.
That was. We probably have more people listening now than ever before. Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I'm not gonna say. I don't want to disappoint. I don't want all our viewers to sign off now that Eric signed off.
Well, I'm sure at least one of the two will keep listening.
All right, so let's just get right down to it, Seth. What do you think about the Powder Blues?
I love the Powder Blues. Maybe it's because I was 8 years old in 1984 when they actually wore these things. But, I'm watching these guys, and it's like, memories coming back. Willingham looking a lot like Tom Bernansky. Tom Bernansky looking a lot like Tom Bernansky. Honestly, Josmil Pinto, when he's up there and you're looking at that center field camera in, I think he looks a lot like Kirby Puckett when he takes a swing, too. So, it's fun seeing Danny Santana, up there, and Eduardo Escobar looking like Lenny Faedo in his uniform. And it's pretty fun. I enjoy this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I liked him. I guess my first reaction, I saw Trevor Plouffe and I was like, that guy's big. But I don't know if it's just the color or the size of the jerseys or what it is, but I thought Trevor Plouffe looked like he was about 30 pounds heavier wearing the Powder Blues than he does wearing the regular uniforms.
maybe he did, and he probably doesn't mind that either.
Moving right on down the line, this week, Steve Burr, a.k.a. Jim Cricket, did a two-part interview with Terry Ryan that was very informative. That was featured both on the Knuckleballs blog and also at Twins Daily. It was also picked up and written about by Derek Wetmore of ESPN 1500. There's a lot of good stuff. Seth, do you have any critiques or any comments you would like to add?
No, it was interesting because originally he was planning on doing that as a one-part, one-story type of thing, and fortunately he made it into two long parts. But I mean, for me, the first part, the key thing there was Terry Ryan himself. He plans to be back. He made that Cedar Rapids trip. It was really his first trip to see an affiliate this year, kind of to see where he was at. I mean, there was a lot of good information in part one about him. And then he talked a little bit about the draft, which we'll talk about more later. But in part two, he talked about Cole Stewart. He talked about Chad Christensen. He talked about, the Cedar Rapids team a little bit, even though he had just been there for 3 or 4 days. But I thought it was interesting. I mean, honestly, we do a lot of Q&As with players and stuff, but when you can get a Q&A or an interview with, obviously a pretty important decision maker, you can learn a lot. I don't know. Did you grab a lot from that?
Yeah, I was just I'm always impressed when I hear Terry Ryan or read stuff about Terry Ryan when he doesn't give you the types of responses that I would expect to read or hear from someone that's in that type of position. The one thing he said was that I remember reading was he said something. He's like, but I wasn't here. I haven't seen it. So he doesn't give you the idea that he knows everything just because he's Terry Ryan, and that's impressive to me. Obviously, we all know he wasn't there, but it's like he still points that out, that what he's seen is limited, and that what he's trying to do, and that he's talking to other people, listening to other people. And I just don't think that every GM in baseball would give you that same type of, I don't, that he doesn't know everything that's going on in his organization. And that's one of the things I like about Terry Ryan, is that he, leans on other people and relies on those people for information.
And I think that's important, and I do think that is what's made the organization. I mean, people not only move up within the system, but they can do that because they're included and their opinion counts. And we can talk about that with the scouting, where you've got the area scouts who can make recommendations, and then that kind of goes through your cross-checkers and then to a Mike Radcliffe before Darren Johnson makes a pick. Well, Terry Ryan can't be at all 4 affiliates, plus the big league team, plus down in the Dominican at the summer league offices. He can't be everywhere. And I know that the minor league coaches all fill out reports on all the players for each game. I mean, it's not just look at the box score and see who got 3 hits. It was, this guy hit the ball hard 3 times, even though he went 0 for 4. This guy didn't handle this situation very well, and we were able to use it as a teaching thing. I mean, all that stuff gets into a report that they all see, and I'm thinking that's Terry Ryan, it's Brad Stile. I think Ron Gardenhire probably sees that, every day. So, yeah, he can say that he hasn't seen them, and to me, having been in Fort Myers for spring training for 8 days this year, trying to make that trek down to Cedar Rapids once or twice a year, to actually see these guys in person is another thing. And to get that first-hand account is so much different than just reading box scores and stats. So, he kind of has to put that all together and then get the reports from everything else. So, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't think many GMs would sit down with someone and just do that for as long as he clearly did.
Well, absolutely. I appreciate that type of thing, and I'm glad to see that he's in good health and is going to be returning. And cancer is a scary thing, and obviously that was a very big deal when it happened. But to think and know that he's back on the path to health and can get back to things that are much less important in life, like baseball.
Absolutely. I mean, and he, from everything I've ever been told, he takes his job as seriously as anybody, and he expects the others underneath to put in the time and to know to know their stuff, and they do. And that's how they've gained trust. That's how they've done all this over time. So, yeah, most important though, I mean, you remember the human side of it, and that's the side that we often forget. I mean, what he went through, I don't know anything about. I won't pretend to know anything about at this stage, and hope I don't find out about that. But knowing him, he's going to come through it in flying colors. He's going to be just fine.
Seth, let's move on to your second number 2 on the bulleted points for today's show.
Very
Joe
nice.
Muller.
Okay.
Tell me what you think about him.
Well, I mean, obviously he went through quite a slump. It was interesting just when people were starting to get upset at him and had about a week of being upset with him. you looked at the numbers, and he was just about up to 290 to 300 range, and he was getting on base 38% of the time, but he didn't have the extra base hits, so people were all upset about that. And then a lot of the defenders of Joe Mauer, and I kind of go back and forth because, I mean, there's different topics, and you can kind of cover them all, but you know, he did get down to that 265, 260 range, and he was in quite a slump, not only not getting extra base hits, but not getting hits, period, and he was swinging and missing a lot. You know, so there was a time where, you know, it made sense. But I think the big differentiator for me is having the ability to say he's not hitting well, he is struggling, versus he's a terrible player. And I just think too many people are, oh, he's just terrible, he's just terrible. He's been pretty bad. But let's not let that negate what he did for the first 10 or 11 years of his career. And you know, let's realize that he's got a pretty sweet swing, and it's going to come around. I do think, and I'd like your thoughts on this too. And Parker wrote about this on Twins Daily last week too. I've really felt that he's been hurt as much as anybody by the shifts. And I realize somebody made the comment that Joe Mauer's swing is kind of shift-proof, but that's not true. You've seen guys playing on the left field line in left field, and I also think that he's lost a lot of hits by shortstops pretty much playing up the middle. A lot of, when I grew up, you were always told just hit the ball hard, hit it up the middle, you're going to get a hit. He's hit the ball up the middle a lot, and these plays now are just easy ground balls to the shortstop, who's now playing at second base basically. So he's got some adjusting to do, and I think it's okay to admit that he's had a tough year, that he's got to make some adjustments. But to think that there's some overriding theme or something that we need to worry about, I just think that's too much.
Right. I think what you said is the most important thing is that he needs to make adjustments. I don't want to hear people make excuses for him because, oh, now the defense shifted and his well-hit balls are landing in gloves. Yeah. That's what should happen. This should have happened a long time ago. If he's going to hit it down the left field line, then they should have moved there. And now he needs to adjust and just not keep hitting it down the left field line. And the hits that should be doubles are now outs. Yeah, they're outs. It's like hitting it to the left fielder. It's an out. And if hitting it up the middle is going to result in an out, now you need to hit it somewhere where they're not. And the thing that I guess bothers me is these unwritten rules of baseball. If someone shifts against me, I'm just going to bunt it, or I'm going to hit it where they're not. And I don't understand why that's not okay. And if they're shifting against Joe Mauer and he lays down a bunt down the third baseline because nobody's there, or whatever he has to do, pulls it down the right field line because the right fielder is now shifted into right center field, then that's okay. And if he's not making adjustments, which is hard to do when you're striking out, then that's his problem and not, well, let's make excuses for him. He's a great hitter. We get that. But he should be able to hit them where people aren't going to catch them.
Well, and that's not as easy as it sounds. But I would say this. I used to always give Mauer, give him grief, as in tell people I didn't think he was great defensively. I didn't think that he was very good at blocking balls in the dirt in unimportant or not as important situations. If I compared him defensively to Drew Butera, to me Butera was significantly better, and that's not to say he was bad. And frankly, because of his offense, I didn't care that he was subpar defensively, even though he won Gold Gloves. So I wasn't as worried about that. But I would also point that out, and I think it's fair to point out some things. But I also think what's unfair is, and if you, as you said, if he were to, with infield shifted over, if he was to bunt one down the third base line, do you know how many Twins fans would suddenly say, see, he can't hit extra base hitters, he's just a singles hitter, and now he's just a guy who's a slap little bunt hitter guy. He can't win. And I think that's what I'm coming to the conclusion of. Whether it's the salary or whether it's the fact that he's never going to be a 30 home run hitter like so many people for some reason think he could be, he's not going to win in this town. And Twins were absolutely right in giving him the contract because they had to. And if they would have let him go at that time, they would have been bashed. And now they kept him, and he's doing what most post-30 catchers do. He is kind of regressing a little bit. And we'll see where he ends up at the end of the year. I'm still not all that worried. We'll see where he ends up. but it's not unusual. People pay those big contracts for what has happened in the past, and you like to think for a little bit of what's going to happen in the future. But to think that suddenly after 30, even with the move to first base, he's suddenly going to become something he's never been, I don't think that's fair for fans to expect.
Right, I would agree with you. How do you feel about his defense at first base?
I think it's improved over the last few weeks. I always laughed at people when they said, "Well, just move him to third base. He's a good athlete." And I just watch him playing first base and realize it's not as easy as people think to play first base. Imagine how scary it would be if he was playing third base right now. I mean, it's tough. I mean, there's different angles. Ground balls take, hops. I mean, it's not like just sitting back there and catching the ball. I think he's definitely improved over the last couple of weeks. I think we've seen some diving plays where he looks more instinctual. And I think when it comes to just catching the ball and making the routine plays, I think he's come a long ways. Is he a Gold Glove guy yet? I don't think so. Will he become that? I think he could. I still believe he could, but I think he's got a long ways to go, and I think he'll get there. Well, I mean, do you disagree?
I don't think he'll ever be well, he may be above average defensively, but it's interesting about the third base thing, because I don't know that if the Twins flip-flopped the two of them, Plouffe and Mauer, that the defense is going to be any better. The overall defense is going to be any better.
It would be way worse. Personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it would be worse, but I think the idea would be, if you do that, it'll be way better, and it won't be. But I do think that if Mauer would have come up as a third baseman, he would be an above-average third baseman. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Right, because if he would have come up as that, he would have been doing that from the time he was young.
I think, but learning something at age 30, and he's still a phenomenal athlete. And I think that he could do it, but there's no point in doing that. Let's put him at first base and just see what he has. Plus, the issue is going to be, as a corner player, the value should be in your bat. And his value is never going to come in the form of 30 home runs.
Yep.
And no matter where he plays, if it's the corner, people are going to be, well, he doesn't hit enough home runs. And that's a problem. And I think the result of that is the year that he hit so many home runs. And, people thought, well, he should be someone he's not. Plus, he's a big dude. Joe Mauer is Joe Mauer. And at the end of the day, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. But it's just one of those things that, like you said, he'll never make this town happy. And the contract was deserved, and now people will spend the next 5 years complaining about it, like they've spent the last 3 years complaining about it. And that's just, it's not ideal, but it is what it's going to be. We spent enough time talking about Joe. Let's talk about the catchers. Let's talk about the breakdown of the games that Kurt Suzuki and Josmiel Pinto are getting. Is it anything that you expected it to be?
Coming into the season, I think I thought it would be a little more 50-50, but then watching both Pinto and Suzuki catch, and there's no way if I was managing it'd be 50-50. I'd have Suzuki at least 2 out of 3. And that's how I do it. Every series, if it's a 2-game series or a 3-game series, I'd have Suzuki catch 2 of them, and I'd make sure Pinto catches 1 of them. I think where people's concern is more in the fact that Pinto needs to have his bat in the lineup. And I think we can all agree with that. People can call it an irrational fear of Gardy's, that he doesn't want to have both his catchers in the lineup in case something happens. And I think it's a little bit irrational. But I pointed out on Twins Daily in a forum the other day, no other teams do that. No other teams have a third catcher, but no other teams have 2 hitting catchers. This is a unique situation, and it is something that other teams don't worry about it. So the comment that I hear so often is nobody else does this is probably true, but nobody else is in that position. Most teams have a good hitting catcher and a really bad hitting catcher that's really good at defense. The Twins are fortunate to have 2 guys that can hit a little bit at catcher, and so So I guess I don't blame Gardy as much as a lot of people. I see guys on the back end of the 25-man roster that aren't playing a lot and frankly shouldn't play a lot. So my thought is, regardless of what we think as fans, if Gardy's not going to have Pinto in the lineup and Suzuki in the lineup, or more importantly, just having Pinto in the lineup, whatever the situation is, because he doesn't have a third catcher, well, get him a third catcher. You know, do I like it? Not necessarily. Well, most Twins fans, not necessarily, but who cares? Whatever it's going to take to get Pinto in the lineup because he's one of your best hitters. Just do it. And right now, Chris Herman's hurt. He's got the sore wrist thing, which everyone's got the wrist injury this year. Eric Fryer's there, and I get he's not great, but he's going to play maybe 2 at-bats a week. Get him up here and get Pinto in the lineup. That's my thing. That's my frustration is it's not so much at Gardy. I mean, I get that thought process too. My thought process is more, whatever, get him in the lineup. I don't care. I mean, I'm sure you disagree somewhat.
Well, the thing that bothers me so much is it's this fear like, well, if you do it, it's going to have this long-term effect. It's not going to have a long-term effect. It's going to have an effect of, well, we're gonna have one game where it might not be okay. But Gardy is a manager famous for having Sunday afternoon lineups be not very good lineups. And if he's afraid of giving away a couple at bats, he wouldn't have those Sunday afternoon lineups that he's been so famous for in the past. Right? I mean, does that make sense? Am I crazy?
Yeah. I mean, it's a 162-game season. Guys need days off.
Right. So if you're gonna give days off, which you have to give, who cares if you have to give up at a bat? Plus, if you give up, if Suzuki gets hurt and Pinto's DHing, the likelihood that it happens in the first 3 innings or even 4 innings is not very high. If Pinto has to come in, you give up your DH after the 5th inning, you're talking about a time where the Twins starter's probably not in the game. So what's the big deal? You give up your DH, you pinch hit for the guy, you bring in a relief pitcher. The likelihood of it affecting the outcome of a game, of that particular game, is so much smaller than the likelihood of losing a game because you went with your B lineup on a Sunday afternoon. The other thing that is just crazy talk is the other day Chris Parmelee played right field instead of playing first base, and Gardy made the comment that he didn't want his backup first baseman DHing. Seriously? That whole idea is just, it's flawed to a point where it's hard to take the guy seriously. And I'm probably more of a Gardy supporter than 75% of Twins fans are, but for the love of God, you can't have this fear of losing and having to patch a couple at bats where it's not what you want. It's crazy. And he's given up way the probability or the likelihood of a win has gone down way more when he's DHing guys that aren't as good of hitters as the guy that he is sitting on the bench. And at the end of the day, that's going to cost the team victories.
Yeah, and again, so get him a catcher. Either that or fire him. And they're not going to fire him, so get him a catcher.
It's that easy. Kubel out.
Well, I mean, honestly, that's my thought. I mean, I agree. I mean, we've talked about the whole need for a third catcher so much over the last how many years? You know, I mean, it's been going on for 2 or 3 years. When they had Doman, there was a question with Mauer. How do you get both of them in the lineup? I mean, at this point, I mean, as a GM or whatever, either get rid of the manager, and I'm sure there's some Twins fans that for some reason think that would be a good idea, and or get the catcher so that your best lineup can be out there every day. I mean, to me, it's that simple.
All right, Seth, moving on. Next topic number 4, but really the 5th one, buying Escobar.
Yeah, I mean, here's my question for you. Are you buying Eduardo Escobar at this point as the everyday shortstop for not only this year, but potentially going forward yet?
I am perfectly content with letting him ride out the rest of this year and seeing what happens.
I agree. I'm hearing a lot of people say that, and I don't disagree. I've never been on the Danny Santana is for sure a major league catch or shortstop bandwagon. Although I think he's had a nice showing here for sure, but I mean at the same time I'm like, is Eduardo Escobar? Yeah, he's got 150 plate appearances or whatever the number is. We've seen that. I mean, he didn't play as much the first month, so now he's basically got a full month and then about halftime the previous month. We'll see how things turn. But what's encouraging is he's not just blooping in some singles. He's hitting the ball hard, and defensively, he's not Pedro Florimon. I still don't think he's Pedro Florimon, but he's pretty solid. I think he's above average. I don't know what the stats would tell you, and I'm not going to read them anyway, but I think he's at least average, if not a little better than average at shortstop. So, yeah, I'd definitely ride it, at least until he slows down a little bit.
He did ground into his first ever double play yesterday.
And what was that, 1,600 plate appearances or something like that?
Something just absurd. Which is too
Almost
bad.
as
But yeah,
absurd as the number of at-bats and plate appearances that Ben Revere had without his first major league home run.
He hit a home run. Punto hit a home run. And then there was a third event that happened too, of someone hitting a home run that was just like, that was completely shocking. And I don't remember who it was. But moving on again. Keep this rolling. The carousel that is the center field position with the Minnesota Twins. We've had Hicks. We've had Sam Fuld. We've had Hicks. We've had Santana. We've had Santana's eyelid busted open. We've had Hicks. And now we have Santana again. It is June 3rd, and it appears that Danny Santana might be your center fielder. How crazy is that?
That's pretty crazy. I mean, as we were talking about before, I think you asked me the question, would we have thought that 3 weeks ago or maybe a month ago? Well, a month ago, we wouldn't have thought that he would have been up as a big league shortstop, much less as a center fielder, having not played any center field since low A ball. But right now, he's proven that he can be at least adequate defensively. Is he a good center fielder? No. But can his speed outrun some of his angles and mistakes and things like that? Yeah. And he's not going to be perfect. He's not going to hit every cutoff. It's weird that it's just so different out there than in the infield. So expect a lot of mistakes. But for right now, I think it's a real option that he could be the center fielder for the time being. If nothing else, he could be the left-handed hitting center fielder, with Aaron Hicks being the right-handed hitting center fielder. But I really think until Sam Fuld is able to come back, I think Aaron Hicks will go down so he can start getting some at-bats right-handed. I also wouldn't necessarily be surprised if there could be a trade in the works. Because right now this is a team that's not far out of contention. And as much as we don't think they're there yet, and they probably are smart enough to realize they're probably not there yet, I mean, if you're close at the All-Star break still, you just, unless Santana continues this for the next month, you just don't necessarily go with a guy who's never played much center field for that important of a role. I think center field's a pretty important role, kind of like shortstop in the infield.
So what you're suggesting is that the Twins may trade for a center fielder to be their center fielder of the next year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, I would think someone who's, certainly not a high-end guy, but maybe someone who, you could have who's under contract for a year or year and a half. I mean, as much as we would like to have thought that Byron Buxton would be knocking at the door, even now, he's still not playing. He's still not ready to even play in extended spring training games yet. As Terry Ryan said in that interview in Cedar Rapids, they're not convinced. They're not going to say he's going to lose this whole year. That it's not going to be important. They're going to get him at bats as soon as he's ready, and that probably means Arizona Fall League. It could mean winter ball. It could mean a lot of things. And maybe he's ready by the middle of next year now, which is probably a more realistic timeline. He'll be up at 21 instead of 20, or even how young he is. But I don't know. I'm starting to kind of wonder if maybe there's a little something going on.
I don't like when you do that type of thing. When you pretend like you know something and then you can't share it with me. I don't like that at all.
Well, I mean, there's nothing really to share, but I mean, it's just a lot of intriguing things happening,
Okay, I'm gonna totally.
And at the end of the day, the reality is they're not going to go into a pennant race, and again, not that they're in that, but with the two wild card teams, weird things happen. They're not going to go into that with Danny Santana as their everyday shortstop.
Center fielder.
Center fielder, I mean. Well, for sure not shortstop.
Take the exact opposite approach and say that Danny Santana is the starting center fielder for the Minnesota Twins opening day 2015.
Wow. Anyone listening to this want to add some comments in the Q&A thing on the right side of the screen, please feel free to.
And I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to say that, not because I think Danny Santana is the answer, but because Aaron Hicks is doing everything in his ability to not be the answer. And I think he's more than worn out his welcome. The only reason he's up right now is because there's not another guy. The only reason he played the other day is because Santana couldn't. They were talking about how risky this was and how there was there could be, it's a scary injury, and then all of a sudden he's back like 2 days later. I have a feeling that Aaron Hicks will get sent down, and when Aaron Hicks gets sent down, we may never see Aaron Hicks in a Twins jersey ever again.
You could very well be right. I personally don't think that's the case. I mean, I think there's a chance that he is able to come back at some point. But I do think a lot's got to change. And I think a lot of that is in the mind of the Twins brass, including the coaching staff, but also in the mind of Aaron Hicks. I think, he's just got to start been playing with more confidence. You watch him and there's just not a lot of confidence there. And it shows through, whether it's real or not.
If I was running the show, he goes down. It's the second option year. 2015, I don't even think about bringing him up. I mean, unless he absolutely goes bonkers in AAA. It'll be his third option year. I'll make a decision on him 2 years from now, 2016. Because I just think he's done what Aaron Hicks wants to do and not what the Twins want him to do. And I don't know that he's rubbed anybody the right way. And I think Danny Santana right now is not anywhere near Gardy's doghouse. And I think Danny Santana is going to try to keep it that way. And I don't think Hicks really cares. So I hope I'm wrong. I would love to see Aaron Hicks be, the guy that some people thought could be a Rookie of the Year last year. I'm just not certain that is ever going to happen. Let's move on. Let's talk about the Twins taking 2 out of 3 in the Bronx and getting pretty stellar pitching performances in all 3 games.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty impressive. As much as Ricky Nolasco on Friday night and Kevin Correa on Saturday afternoon kind of put some runners on base, they were able to work out of it, and at the end of the day, both of them went 6 innings and gave up 1 run. And to me, that's pretty veteran, and that's the type of thing that I think Terry Ryan was going after when he picked and signed those guys. Again, they're not the aces, but they're the guys that are going to do just that. They're not going to look necessarily great, but at the end of the day, the numbers that they put up were pretty good. And I think if Correa can put up for the rest of the year the types of numbers he put up last year, you can be pretty happy, and actually you'd probably be able to get some value for a guy like that. Nolasco's got to get better, but that was a good sign. I mean, that was a good good sign that maybe I mean, it was a game that could potentially give him some confidence going forward. And then Phil Hughes, eight innings and 1 run against his old team in Yankee Stadium on Sunday afternoon. You just had to feel good for him when the Twins did come back and tie it and then win it, so that he got the win and didn't take the loss, 2-1. But I mean, there were a few scares. Jan Hervis Solarte hit that deep fly ball to the warning track in right field with a guy on or two mid-game. That, I mean, it's a pop-up in Target Field, but it got pretty close in Yankee Stadium. So you can see where those types of fly balls would potentially get on, get over the fence in Yankee Stadium. So it had to feel good for him, and it is interesting. I mean, he's a 2-pitch pitcher, basically fastball cutter, threw a couple curveballs maybe, but he's a 2-pitch pitcher, and he's being that successful. And it always goes back to that. You see guys like that don't necessarily have a ton of stuff. They have 1 or 2 pitches that are really good. They have good control. And then you got guys that have like 5 pitches and they mix it up and they throw 98, but never really succeed. And right now, Phil Hughes is finding a way to make it work.
He's a 2-pitch pitcher. Is he an all-star?
I haven't looked enough at who else is in that discussion, at who else is around there, but I would certainly think he'd be in the discussion because not only does he have the pretty record that a lot of people look at, he's got the ERA, he's got the story, he's got the lack of walks, I mean the lack of home runs, and he's done everything they could have hoped. So I think the bigger issue may be how many Twins are they going to put on the roster if they're a 500 team? That's probably the bigger question. Will they get 2, and could they possibly get 3? I don't know.
Well, I mean, they got 2 last year, and they weren't very good. So, I mean, I would like to say that Dozier's an all-star, but at this point, I don't know. As a second baseman, if he makes it, so then you look at Hughes and Perkins and get 2 that way. I mean, that would be
right.
That would be a neat story. I don't know. If Perkins made it last year, you'd think there's a good chance he could make it again this year.
I think Perkins is probably a given. Hughes, with a couple more good starts, could be right in that category too, although often those come right down to that final week, before they make the decision of who makes it. So he'll have to pitch well for another month, but he can do that. Dozier, I think, deserves it, but when you've got Pedroia and Kipnis and Kinsler and Cano in front of you at second base, it becomes a little bit more difficult to make it, even with him being a hometown guy. But I'd put his numbers right there this year with any of those guys. That goes back to the discussion on what is an all-star? Is it the guy who's having a good year this year for 2 months, 2.5 months, or is it a guy like Cano who may not quite have the numbers this year and he does? Is it one of those other guys who's had a good longer career and is still solid, who maybe deserves that spot?
Speaking of solid, Willingham's back along with Oswaldo Garcia, and we're seeing some offense from both of those guys. Willingham, I believe, has 4 home runs since his return. Arcia had a home run in his first at bat after his stint on the disabled list and in AAA. How are they going to inject runs into the Twins' offense?
I mean, what it does is it extends the lineup, and instead of Kubel having to play left field, you've got Willingham out there. Arcia is the guy that you can have in right field every day, pretty much. I mean, these are guys that can hit a home run anytime they're batting. Even Willingham, as rough as last year was, and as poor as this spring was, he's always got that that threat of a home run when he comes up to bat. So, I mean, that's one thing. But Arcia, just as Eric said before, every time he hits the ball and makes contact, he hits the ball hard, it seems. And that's pretty exciting. Roy Smalley did a great job of pointing out the hitch in his swing that is going to come back to haunt him over time if he doesn't correct that a little bit. But he's exciting. So now your lineup just gets extended. And you've got Dozier and Mauer and Plouffe. And now you've added Willingham and Arcia, and you hopefully eventually throw Pinto in there. Suzuki's been terrific all season. and you're pretty solid. If you get Santana and he starts doing what we think he can do, and he's done it so far, and I'm not saying he can keep it up, but if he's at the bottom of your lineup with Escobar, you've got 1 through 9 that anyone on any day could hurt you a little bit. So that, to me, that's the biggest thing, is you've just extended that lineup, and now you could have anywhere from 7 to 9 pretty decent hitters in the lineup in a game.
We're going to move over to the minor side of things, and before we do that, just a rundown of what's happened transaction-wise over the last week. Earlier this week, Chris Herman went to the DL with a sprained right wrist, was replaced in Rochester earlier today or yesterday by Danny Ortiz, coming up from New Britain, who's hit really well. He'll be in the outfield. Ortiz's spot in New Britain was filled by Jairo Rodriguez, a catcher who was moved out of Fort Myers to make room for the return of Stuart Turner, who is on the temporary inactive list. The big transaction news in the minor leagues takes place yesterday in Cedar Rapids, where after the game, Derek Pania, who had made the start yesterday, and Felix Jorge, who had been a starter in Cedar Rapids, were sent back to extended spring training, and replacing them in Cedar Rapids will be Lewis Thorpe, who is arguably a top 10 Twins prospect, arguably the top left-handed prospect in the Twin system, and Fernando Romero, who arguably is the hardest throwing Twins prospect. And I know, Seth, you've seen both of those guys in spring training. Give us your scouting report in a nutshell on those two.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different. I mean, in fact, they're opposites. The one thing they have in common is neither one is very tall. Obviously, we had Lewis Thorpe on a couple of weeks ago, and he's from Australia, and as a 17-year-old last year, just dominated the GCL. When I saw him, I saw a guy that stands poised on the mound, has a real fluid motion, doesn't look like he's exerting a whole lot of energy, just a real smooth delivery, and his fastball sat 89 to 91. So nothing that screams overpowering at this point, but he had a good curveball, and he had a good changeup, and even just in those couple of times I saw him, he had good control. But what I found interesting is after a couple of errors, he had a situation where it was just a spring game against the Rays or something like that. He had a bases-loaded 2-out situation, and he came through by striking out the next 2 batters, one on a huge curveball, and one he pumped it up to 93 when he really needed that out. So, I mean, you can just see that not only does he have the stuff to be successful, so, it's 89 to 92 with that ability to hit 93 already, but he's got the 3-pitch mix, and he's got, as we heard, a knowledge of how to pitch. And to me, that's pretty exciting. Now, Fernando Romero, again, he is a big, stocky guy with big legs, and he gets his drive from his legs, and kind of that prototypical old-school fireballer, and he just flat-out throws hard. I think he got clocked when I watched him and was sitting by the radar gun. He consistently hit 94 to 95 and even hit 96 a couple of times. He does have a really good slider, too. So he's not as polished, but he has huge potential. If he can get a third pitch, he could be a starter in the big leagues and, one of those guys to be really excited about. If he even just continues to grow and get stronger and only has 2 pitches, he could be a dominant reliever. But I think from the sounds of it, they're both going to start for the Colonels right now, and they've needed it. They've had such a struggle with starting pitching lately that, even with 6 guys, they're not getting a lot of quality starts. So hopefully these guys can come up, and we just got to remember they're both really young. They both haven't even pitched in Elizabethton yet, so I don't know how they're going to do. But regardless of how they do, these are guys that are pretty exciting going forward. So that was a big nutshell, but hopefully that helped a lot of people out. Jeremy, would you add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the news was surprising in that there was a handful of guys that I really would have not said are better, not are better prospects, but guys that, based on last year, were probably more deserving to make that jump. Like you mentioned, neither of these guys pitched in Elizabethton. So We're talking about Romero, who's not even 19 and a half, and Thorpe, who is literally the age of a high school senior, moving up to a level that, they're skipping a level to get there. I think I saw today that Lewis Thorpe is the youngest player in the Midwest League by over a month. And, I mean, that's a big deal for an organization that is traditionally very careful about moving guys. We saw Pania come up. We saw Jared Wilson come up. There's a handful of guys that have come up that, people look at and say, "Oh, shoot, they're not the top prospect," but they're guys that are college guys that would be old for the level, and they're still those guys in extended spring, and yet the Twins made the move with these two. Thorpe pitched, and like you've mentioned a number of times previously, it's hard to really gauge the amount of innings that guys have pitched when they're in extended because there's all these other times that they're pitching. But as far as how much these guys pitched in documented games last year, Thorpe pitched 44 innings and Romero pitched 35. Thorpe last year in the Gulf Coast League, according to Baseball Reference, was 3.5 years younger than the league average in the Gulf Coast League. So you're talking about, I mean, they're not just young, man. These guys are puppies. And if we go in with real high expectations, I think we're setting ourselves up to be completely disappointed. But at the same time, if these guys keep their head above water, that's fantastic. And it'll be very exciting over the next few weeks to just see the rotation with Stewart and Romero if he's in fact in the rotation as well as Thorpe.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's a few things too, but the thing I think that surprises you and I the most is some of those guys that weren't promoted at this time. I think you and I, even when we talked with Thorpe 2 weeks ago, we were also talking to Steven Gonsalves, and I think we both would have thought that, last year's 4th round pick would have gotten the first opportunity to move up, in part because of what he did not only in the GCL, but through, 3 or 4 starts in the Elizabethton level too. So I thought he would be the first to be promoted. There's guys like Josh Burris, who last year was actually pitching in the bullpen for Cedar Rapids for a short period of time before he got sent back to pitch in Elizabethton again last year. He still hasn't been called up. Some of those draft picks from last year that I think the Twins kind of took a shot with, guys like Tanner Mendonca, who throws really hard but doesn't always have an idea where the ball's going, or like Tyler Steyerwalt, who I know is one of your favorites, who's a football player that can throw pretty hard, but they're going to try to make him into a pitcher. Those are the kind of guys you understand going pretty slowly with. But there's other guys down there that aren't getting called up, and it's pretty interesting. I still believe that Gonsalves is going to get called up at some point here. I think there's enough guys that could, I don't know how to put it, either get sent back down or released or that type of thing. And with the draft coming up this week and players starting to play, and Elizabeth's season started in about 2 or 3 weeks, I think you're going to see some releases. You're going to see some movement in the next couple of weeks. And I think, it hasn't stopped yet. There will be some more. The other thing to point out is, it's easy for us to say, here's who we think should come up. These decisions are being made by people with the advice of the people that are actually in Fort Myers, that are watching these extended spring training games, and they're most likely calling the guys up that they think are the most ready, or the guys that, for whatever the other situation is. When guys like Pania got called up or Jared Wilson got called up, some of that is age-related, and it should be. But at this point, these guys are moving up despite the age, which tells you how well they're performing. So, it'll be interesting to see how they do.
Absolutely. Do you want to run through the scoreboard for today?
Yeah, we can go through that pretty quickly. Just 3 games, as Cedar Rapids did not play today. Rochester played at Charlotte. They flew in there this morning. They lost they won 5-2. Logan Darnell started. He gave up just 2 runs on 5 hits and 2 walks and 6 1/3, striking out 6. AJ Octor, who was my relief pitcher of the month, he went 1 2/3 innings scoreless. And then Ryan Presley, who's been pitching really well the last month as well, struck out 2 in a scoreless inning for the save. Davinson Romero, he hit his 4th home run. He was 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs. Obviously, that home run was the big hit. James Beresford, another Australian, 2 for 4 with his 9th double. And just to remind people, Chris Colabello has been really struggling since he got sent down. But tonight, 1 for 2 with 2 walks, and maybe seeing the ball better, that can give us a little bit of confidence that he'll turn things around here shortly. Just a quick note, Danny Ortiz was there. He batted 7th and played left field for the Red Wings. He went 0 for 4 in his AAA debut. Down in New Britain, Taylor Rogers was 5-0 in May with an ERA below 3, and he had about 6 or 7 straight quality starts. Well, he did go 7 innings, which was a season high today, but he gave up 5 runs on 8 hits and 2 walks while striking out 4. Cole Johnson pitched a scoreless inning, and Matt Summers, who has also been moved to the bullpen at this point for good, struck out 2 in a scoreless inning. Tony Thomas, 2 for 4 with his 11th double, and then A.J. Pedersen, who's been a frequent appearer on this show, was 0 for 1, but he walked twice in the game. And Fort Myers got an 8-0 win over Tampa, over the Yankees. Jason Wheeler with a second consecutive terrific start. He gave up just 2 hits and he walked 2 in 7 shutout innings to improve to 5-4. He struck out 5. Mason Malatakis, who also has been moved to the bullpen at this time for good, walked 1 and struck out 2 in 2 scoreless innings. Adam Walker was 3 for 5 and drove in 3 runs. He's leading the Florida State League in both RBIs and home runs. Stephen Wickens has returned from his shoulder injury. He was 3 for 4 with a walk. Jorge Polanco with a terrific game. He was just 2 for 2 with a double, his 10th, but he also walked 3 times. And Eddie Rosario was at second base for most of the game tonight. He was 2 for 4 in the game. He did end up in center field when Max Kepler left the game mid-game, and still no word on what happened or why he needed to come out. So there's your scoreboard for tonight. One other bit of news, I guess, in the Florida State League as we're talking about that. They did announce their all-star rosters today, and if I'm jumping ahead, I apologize. But Adam Walker was the lone hitter to represent the Miracle on the Florida State League all-star roster. David Hurlbut, Jose Berrios, and Brett Lee were all named to the team, the 3 pitchers, so 4 of them in all. And I think when you and I thought about that a little bit, we're probably a little surprised, or most surprised, that Jorge Polanco is not listed currently on that roster. And there could be, guys that get promoted or that, and he may end up on the roster. But very surprising that he isn't there just at the outset.
Yeah, after looking at this for a couple of years, I remember looking at the last year the Snappers were a Twins affiliate. Their middle of the year all-star team, it was like almost funny. They were phenomenal, but the guys that they were representing them in the all-star game were not even I think they had 6 or 7 guys. If you would have listed 12 guys, there would have been 2 of those guys that were representing the team that you wouldn't even have on the list. So I don't know exactly how those lists are made, but it doesn't always accurately reflect the guys that are most deserving. And I think that's it's cool to have that accolade, but the end of the year when they put together the all-league team, that's really where I'd rather see the guys. And to be honest, I'd rather see them on top prospect lists that the national publications do, because I think that's being recognized for what they could potentially become, in the long term.
Yeah, and it does seem to be a mix of performance and prospect status, which is why I'm a little bit surprised that Polanco isn't on the list. But a guy like David Hurlbut certainly deserves the spot, and he's not considered a prospect. But if you're going to pick Hurlbut, how do you not pick Matt Tomshaw, who's been even better most of the season? So I mean, it's real funny how it gets picked up, And I'm not saying Hurlbut doesn't deserve it or that Tomshaw does, but how do you pick one of those 2? And Brett Lee missed most of the last month and is back on the disabled list for the second time, and he's on there, and I like Brett Lee as a prospect too. So, it's interesting, but yeah, it's probably something we overthink a little bit.
One question, as long as we're on the minor league thing, we've had questions from multiple people. Danny Ortiz is promoted. He made his debut at Rochester. Wondering if he could be the Twins' fourth outfielder. There was one that I just saw wondering if Danny Ortiz can be the Twins' fourth outfielder like sometime soon. What do you think about those questions?
Well, I mean, let's see how he adjusts to AAA. If he continues to hit like he has the last month in New Britain, then certainly. He's only 24, and that's what's so strange. As a high school draft pick out of Puerto Rico, he signed a year younger than most, say, U.S. players drafted in the Rule 4 draft. But yeah, I think that's his ceiling, to be honest with you. I don't know that he's got the upside to be a starter in the big leagues. He can play all three defensive positions, which was why I think he can be a fourth or fifth outfielder in the big leagues. He's not necessarily a great speed guy, so he's not like a starting center fielder, but he's certainly better than some of the options we've seen so far this year. I mean, he's certainly a better center field option than Chris Parmelee would be. And I think he'd probably be better than Chris Herman probably would be, and he's just played it more. Sometimes we forget, as much as those Caribbean winter leagues, don't necessarily tell everything, it's some really good competition. And Ortiz has played on the same roster as Eddie Rosario and Kenny Vargas the last few years, and he's the guy that typically hits third in those lineups. So this is a guy that's got some serious offensive punch. He's just kind of been streaky at times, and that's kind of held him back.
And you can confirm or refute this, but Danny Ortiz played much of spring training with the AAA affiliate, correct?
Yeah, he was the last guy sent down to the AA roster when the Twins finalized their final roster. So
and played pretty well, right?
Yeah, I mean he's just a really good player. I saw him in a game when Jared Burton was, and Jared Burton doesn't throw sliders during spring training, so he was just out there against the AA and AAA team, or the AAA team, I guess, throwing fastballs. But Danny Ortiz hit a ball about 450 off of him. So I mean he can hit. He's a pretty polished player. And to me that probably means that he lacks some upside, but at the same time, as a fourth outfielder, I'd take I'd have no problem with that. Whether that would be this year, I don't know. I think if he would have started the season at AAA and hit halfway decent, there's a chance he could have been up at some point already.
Yeah, that's kind of huge. One last thing, when we were talking about the minor leagues, the Dominican Summer League just kind of got underway. The Twins played their third game, suffered their third loss. Not a lot of big-time action going on. So far, the news really is the two guys that the Twins spent the most money on in the international signing period last year, two Dominican prospects, Luan Diaz, who's played one game at first base, also played once at DH. So far, his line is 1 for 8 with 5 strikeouts. And Ronnie Tapia, who has played third base twice, is also 1 for 8 with 5 strikeouts. He has a double. Diaz had 2 errors in his first game at first base. I think the team committed 7 total. Today they lost 9-8, committed 3 errors. The most alarming thing is, and maybe it's not alarming, it's just interesting. You look at these box scores. In 8 innings, they didn't have to pitch the 9th because they were losing. They walked 12 batters. So, you're looking at one guy that is a recent signing in the international market, and he got 1 out, didn't give up a single hit, but gave up 3 earned runs off of 4 walks. Then the guy after him, comes in and gives up 2 hits and also walks 4. So, just it's fun to check that out. Because every once in a while you'll have a guy just show up and, who is that guy? And, the one thing I like to always look back is when Seth started doing the handbooks early, he would have the top 5 guys from the Dominican League, and he was fairly accurate. The one year I know that he had Arcia really high. So it's just interesting to check that out, check out the box score, and then, give you a couple names just to follow as the season progresses.
Yeah, I've kind of stopped diving into the DSL as much, and yet I still ask a lot of questions about it, and I am paying attention to the box scores. We know the names, to kind of follow, Lewin Diaz and Roni Tapia, and there's probably a couple of others that we've heard of over the last few years. But, you mentioned the 7 errors, and that's not unusual. I don't know that the baseball fields are real great, at least relative to what they might see in Fort Myers. And these guys are young. I mean, the GCL, the average age there, I think you said was 19 or 20, maybe even 20. The average age in the DSL of at least the prospects is, these are guys that signed at 16, and most of them, if they're going to keep playing for the team, they're going to be playing in the States before they're 18 or, certainly before they're 19. So the average age there is probably 17. So you're going to get a lot of errors. You're going to have a lot of talent. You're going to have a lot of errors. And I mean, I've heard it so many times, and I've said it so many times too. The further you are away from the big leagues, the less the statistics mean. So you mentioned that Lewin Diaz is 1 for 8 or whatever with 5 strikeouts. It's worth noting. It's 1, it's 2 games, but 2, he's going to be a power hitter. So with that's going to come some strikeouts, and it's all 100% about player development at those levels. Where at AAA, it is more about performance, and at AA, the higher you get, the more it is about performance, and that's the way it should be. So I mean, you kind of have to read those box scores, is what I'm saying to people, is read those box scores with kind of a bigger understanding of what that purpose is.
Yeah, for sure. Recently, you've been posting the selections for the May starting pitcher, relief pitcher, and hitter of the month. Do you want to recap those quickly? We don't have a lot of questions to get to, but we should probably talk about the draft as it is only a couple days away.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about our plans. For Thursday, we'll kind of walk through that real quick before we're done. So hopefully you'll get a chance to tune into some of that at least that day. But yeah, just to go back to that, the research and who did well in May. It's always interesting when you do these types of things because you're picking May 1st through May 31st. I mean, you could pick a 4-week period anywhere, and it's kind of a little random with what it is and what it means. So it is what it is, but it is kind of fun to take a look at who pitched well and who played well. Earlier, I think it was on Sunday, I posted the relief pitcher of the month, and I went with AJ Octor from Rochester. And again, he's on there seemingly every year. The last 2 years that he's been in the bullpen, I mean, frankly, I hear so much about Michael Tonkin, and I love the 95-mile-an-hour fastball too, but Octor throws 92, but he flat out gets people out. And maybe it's an Anthony Slamus situation where someone believes his stuff doesn't play up at the big league level. Maybe that's the case. We don't know. But when it comes to numbers, he's been so much better than what Tonkin's been the last few years that, he definitely deserves to be noticed. The other one I'd mention is Tim Shibuya, who was the Appalachian League starting pitcher or pitcher of the year a few years back. He had some shoulder surgery a couple of years ago and has come back in the bullpen. And even though he's not a real hard thrower and he's a control guy, in May he had more than a strikeout per inning, and he still hardly walks anybody. So he's worth watching. The other guys, Todd Van Steensel from Cedar Rapids, Brandon Peterson, who was started at Cedar Rapids, moved up to Fort Myers, and then Lester Oliveros, who is still at New Britain. Any comments on that, Jeremy, or should I jump to the starting pitchers?
I think go to the starting pitchers.
All right. Starting pitcher, I picked Matt Tomshaw as starting pitcher of the month, and the guy had a 0.6 ERA and a 0.89 WHIP over 27 innings and 4 starts, which is really hard to beat. I've written about him and number 4 pick, David Hurlbut, a lot because they're the unsung types of guys that people don't talk about but should. They just keep getting the job done. J.O. Barrios, his June 1st start, his Sunday start was pretty impressive. He gave up just 1 hit in 7 innings, no runs, and he struck out 13, and I think he walked none. Just an incredible performance, but that was June 1st, so he finishes just second because he did have a strong May as well. Speaking of May, Trevor May had a great month as well. He gave up 4 runs in his first start of the month, and then he went for his last 4 starts of May. He gave up 0 runs over his final 26 innings. He was the International League Pitcher of the Week this last week, and we got to start thinking he's he's getting pretty close. Again, David Hurlbut, number 4 with Fort Myers. And Chris Johnson had a tremendous month in Rochester as well. I think his ERA was under 1.5 for the month, if it was even that. So with the strikeout per inning. So, I mean, there was some pretty good. And if people go to Twins Daily and check out those articles, really pitcher of the month, starting pitcher of the month, I think in each case there were 3 to 5 honorable mentions that most months would probably appear in the report. So great pitching month of May for the Twins organization.
You mentioned about Berrios, and I just want to, I don't know if you guys caught it on Twitter, but Jason Parks of Baseball Prospectus was talking about him and said that both Berrios and Stewart would rank in the top 50 if he had to redo the top 50 right now, and that he would have Berrios ahead of Cole Stewart in his prospect rankings. So, I mean, Berrios has taken a step up, which is fantastic. Obviously, he's going to have to take another big step up here, and that may possibly happen this year going to New Britain, but Berrios has been phenomenal, and obviously it's a June thing that he had that great start, but I think he's set himself up nicely for any of June awards that you'll be giving out.
Yeah, that's certainly a good way to get started. And let's jump real quickly to the hitter of the month. There weren't as many options. Number 5, I went with Oswaldo Arcia, even though half of his stint down there that month was rehab, and the other half he finally started hitting. I had him at number 5. New Britain outfielder Reynaldo Rodriguez was number 4. He had over 300 with about 12 extra base hits. Cedar Rapids, Jason Kanzler, I had him at number 3. He had a great month. I think he hit about 370 and got on base. And he was a Gold Glove guy at the University of Buffalo, too, so he's a good all-around player.
Twice.
I'm sorry?
Twice. 2-time Gold Glover.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Kenneth Vargas, I had at number 2, and I think most of the month a lot of people assumed that he would get it. He had a huge month. OPS just under 1. He had maybe 5 home runs or something. It just really hit well. But you couldn't really argue with Danny Ortiz as the choice because he just had a monster month. I mean, his OPS was by far the highest. He hit 388 and slugged 12 doubles, 2 triples, and 4 home runs all in 1 month. So you can understand, one, why he was named the player of the month, and you can understand why, when there was a need, he was the guy that moved up to Rochester. He's just, like I said earlier, kind of a lot less forgotten guy because he's not the top prospect, but he's a guy worth paying attention to.
All right, we have just a few minutes left. If you are just joining us because you're a night owl like that, we should tell you what's going on for the rest of this week. Obviously, next Tuesday, Seth and I will come back on here, and we'll recap a bunch of stuff like we do typically. But on Thursday night, we will be doing a special hangout that will start at 6 p.m. It will go from 6 till 7 p.m. And we'll be covering the first probably 8 or 9 picks of the draft. Or that's at least when we'll be talking. We'll be talking a lot about how the early picks are going to affect what the Twins are going to do, and the Twins will make their choice sometime probably around 6:35-ish. We don't know exactly when they'll put the first team on the clock, but it'll probably be shortly after 6:30. At 7 o'clock, we're going to sign off. I'm going to drive into the cities. Seth is not going to drive in the cities because that would take him like 17 hours by car, I think, from where he lives to the Minneapolis area. So he's going to just join us by phone, and Seth, myself, and the Twins Geek will be doing a bit on K-Fan from 9 till 10. So please join us. We'll be covering the draft in depth. There's a ton of stuff on Twins Daily right now covering all the guys that the Twins could potentially draft. I'm going to put out my final mock draft tomorrow night. There's a lot of things going on right now behind the scenes, and I don't know if this will be a normal-ish draft, kind of like last year was. Obviously, I wouldn't have had Jonathan Gray going to the Rockies and Chris Bryant going to the Cubs, I'd have had that switched around. But the top 5 guys I all would have had in the top 5. And at this point in time, I don't know how my top 5's even going to look, because there's some rumblings that some guys may drop a lot farther than anybody thought. So I'm going to kind of see how things play out. The Twins are hosting a handful of prospects early this week at Target Field for workouts. They're understandably, I couldn't get names of those players, and that's fine. That's not something I was even going to try to dig. But they also are going to have some local guys in addition to the guys that they could be considering with some top picks. So the next couple of days is going to be very, very interesting. Friday, then after the draft, I will be covering that live at Twins Daily, getting up scouting reports and a lot of interacting with readers or tweeters or whatever you want to do on Friday, rounds 3 through 10. And then Saturday is a much quicker pace thing with more obscure people that we'll be covering on Twins Daily as well. So a pretty action-packed next few days is in addition to the Twins playing the Brewers in Target Field Wednesday and Thursday. There's really a lot of stuff going on in Twins territory.
There is, and I mean, not to tout the site, and maybe we should have touted it more earlier in the show when more people are listening, but, I mean, between Sunday afternoon and Monday night, I think we had 12 or 13 new articles posted on the front page of Twins Daily. So it's getting a lot of new, good quality content, and we've got the header area where Jeremy does his rosters and payrolls, which I'm sure everyone looks at daily. Just above that, there's a section for MLB Draft, kind of like when we were all in spring training and did reports from down there. We've got the MLB Draft area. I noticed a lot of new people are starting to write some blogs too, which I think is exciting. Some of those could get to the front page, but don't forget to jump in and look at the blogs page because some of it doesn't. But yeah, for instance, Jeremy did his article on Alex Jackson. Nick Gordon, there was an article Steve Lean did yesterday. We've gone through 8 or 9 different players, and Jeremy's got his mock draft. But I'm excited for our hangout on Thursday, so I encourage as many of you as you'd like, watch that, or listen to it later on iTunes, because we'll kind of be watching it live and just kind of reacting as it happens and trying to predict what the Twins will do, because we don't know. And then Jeremy mentioned the Twins are also bringing people in right now to work out. Let's not forget that 2 years ago they brought in Adam Walker that final week and had him work out at Target Field. And there's guys that they'll end up drafting in the 20s, things like that they just want one more look at to see if it's somebody they really want to see. So there's just a ton going on right now.
For sure, Seth. Do we want to say anything more, or are we good? One thing, our show will be on iTunes sometime tomorrow morning. You can also download it on the Libsyn webpage or listen to it there. In addition to that, if you go to the Twins Daily article, I kind of scripted everything, so you can read everything that we talked about. Obviously, if you made it this far, you don't really care, but that's something that is new. We'll see if that floats anybody's boat. So that's a done deal. Other than that, Seth, I think we should call it a Tuesday evening. The Twins got their win tonight to have a winning road trip, so that was fantastic. The Powder Blues got the win. As far as I can tell, the Twins are undefeated when they wear their Powder Blues in the year of 2014.
So be sure to get to the game on Thursday night. If you don't, then listen to us. But if you do, get that Powder Blue jersey and then download us on iTunes the next morning.
All right. With that, I will sign off in the most original Twins Hangout way possible. Thank you for being with us this Tuesday evening as we hung out and talked Twins. We'll be back with you Thursday. Thanks for letting us in your living room or your basement or wherever it is that you let us, or your car or your office. We appreciate it. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for hanging out and talking Twins.